The stories that we heard this morning of Jesus at the well in Samaria with the Samaritan woman, and the story of Israel in Exodus thirsting, has got a lot to do with each other. They don't follow one another, it's not the same kind of theme, but thirst is binding them together. And more than that, God providing is binding them together. It's very interesting when you read Exodus. It's the history lesson of Israel. It's their journey from Egypt to Canaan. And a lot happens, and sometimes we just browse over it and we don't realize the richness that are in a few verses. But this passage, the wilderness passage, is part of a series of wilderness narratives that happens between the time they leave Egypt and the time they reach Sinai. Now, Sinai is an important moment for them. Remember, they meet God there. A lot happens at Sinai. And so this is the journey to there. And so we find 6 of them, I think. They departed from the Sea of Reeds in Exodus chapter 15. And that's in that wilderness journey. That's kind of where it starts. Then they start to journey through the wilderness of Shur. In Exodus 15:22, they arrive at Marah, where God turns bitter water into sweet water. I had a parishioner whose name was Mara, and she would always tell me that story. She would always say, "My name is Mara, for God turned my life from bitterness into something sweet." And when she was still able to bake and young enough to be active, she would always follow that up with, "Can I give you something?" The 4th passage in the series is Exodus 15:27, where they travel to Elim, where God provides springs of water for them to quench their thirst. And then they traveled into the wilderness of Sin. Now, sin here is not sin, as in they did something wrong. It's the name of that area. And in the Hebrew language, it's not an uncommon word. For us, it sounds like they journeyed into sin. They did something wrong. They followed the wrong path, But that's not what this scripture says. But at Sin, that's a magical moment there where God provides them with manna. Do you remember manna? God provided 6 days of the week. He gave them manna from heaven. It's, I think, the initial business plan of Uber Eats or one of these where food arrives at your house. All you can eat, just don't keep any for tomorrow. Beautiful moment there. And then they travel to Rephidim, where we find them in this story. And through all of these wilderness accounts, the whole series of them, we find that it all happens on this journey away from Egypt and towards Sinai. We find that there's a central conflict in all of them. And the conflict is around the scarcity of resources. They find they don't have enough. They can't do what they need to do. We also find, and this hasn't changed, they blame the leadership for their troubles. It's Moses' fault. He led them to there. He should have known. He should have done a better job at planning. He should have scouted. He should have gone ahead. His plan is flawed. The leader, or the leadership, and in these cases, both Moses and Aaron are blamed for the troubles. And the other component that is present in every one of these wilderness stories is that God hears their grievances and responds by providing resources that directly address their needs. When they were thirsty, God provided them with water. There's some more insights in the story, and this is that the Bible, the scriptures that we read, tells us that they moved because God instructed them to do so. They traveled under the leadership and the instruction of God himself. Now, this passage doesn't highlight that, but in Exodus chapter 13, you'll remember that when they traveled by day, there was a cloud providing them with some cover. And when they traveled at night, there was a pillar of fire so that they could see where they were going. They knew God was with them. They knew that God was asking them to move because the cloud moved and the pillar of fire moved. They traveled under God's instruction and God's leadership. They knew God was with them because God was the one feeding them. They received manna 6 out of 7 days. God just provided that they could eat. And so when they lash out at Moses, or at Moses and Aaron, there has to be a deeper issue there. And we do this sometimes too. I don't know if you get hangry. It's that combination of you're hungry, and then because you're hungry, you're a little grumpy and angry. And it just goes away when you eat something. You just feel a lot better. Life just returns to normal. When the pressure is on, what is inside is coming out. And so when Israel lashes out at Moses and Aaron, it's really the symptom of the pressure that they are feeling. They look around them and they know that without water they will die. They can't fake it. It's not one of those things where they can say, oh, well, okay, we can kind of go without bread for a day. Water is essential to their survival. And so they lash out. And we find so many examples in their story of God providing to their very needs. In the Exodus journey, and we don't even have to go further back than that, but in that Exodus journey away from Egypt, God provides so much that if anyone were to be able to stand on the promises of God and stand on God's provision and stand on the testimony that God is alive and God is with us and God is providing for us, it would have been these Israelites. And yet, they lash out. And they ask, what are we going to drink? How are you going to provide? Wilderness journeys, as we find them here, but also in Jesus' case, as stories of transformation. Remember, Jesus went into the wilderness before he started his ministry. John unpacks it so very nicely. And he spent 40 days there. And then he was tempted by the tempter, or the devil, doesn't matter, whichever version you read. At the end of his fasting and being in the wilderness for 40 days, he had to stand upon the promises of God. And the wilderness journey was a transformative journey. In Jesus' case, it kick-started his ministry. It's really the start of him being the Messiah, the prophet, unpacking the scriptures, teaching, healing, showing people to God. And in Israel's case, the wilderness journey is a journey that transforms them. Remember where they were and where they came from. They were enslaved in Egypt. They arrived in Egypt under harsh famine conditions. Then many, many years passed and they were there and they were doing well. And then a different Pharaoh came into charge and realized there's too many of them. They might actually overthrow us. So let's work them to death. And so he built cities with the Israelite men. They were the laborers. And so when God freed them from Egypt, a journey of transformation began. If all you knew was the oppressive and violent enslavement under a cruel leadership, how will you think about God? If authority has only ever been dictative, how would you view God saying, I am your God, the most high divine being? Follow where I lead. So this journey transforms them from that earlier existence of enslaved people into an independent nation. But unlearning the habits that has been established and maintained by dominion is difficult. It's painful. It's slow. It doesn't happen overnight. It didn't happen to them overnight. And today, if you talk to people who freed others from slavery, the human trafficking, I mean, pick any one of those and talk to them about the process, and they'll tell you it is slow and painful. When people are freed from drug addiction, it is a slow and painful process. And it takes, in terms of a nation, it takes generations. It takes generations to unlearn these things. So for Israel, accepting kindness and generosity when all they knew was exploitation was never going to be an easy process. And what the wilderness stories teach us is what God taught them then in those days, is that God provides. God comes through. That's not a spiritual or a ritualistic view of God's provision. It's a very real material view thereof. They needed water, God gave them water. And so as we journey through Lent, and we ask God the same question, will you give us something to drink? Where is our question coming from? Is it the yearning to know God deeper and more intimate, to be shaped into his image day by day, be transformed, our hearts be transformed, as Paul says? Or is it from this place where we realize that resources are too scarce and God needs to provide? I'll admit this morning that sometimes my cry for water is not because I desire a deeper relationship with God, but because I see that our resources are so scarce and I still don't see a way to provide more of that. I think both these questions are valid. I think seeing where we are, seeing the state of church and ministry and society will bring us to this place of desperation where we really rely on God alone, asking God, will you give us something to drink? But the wilderness journey is also your and my transformation, where we ask for something to drink, to nourish our spirits, to realize that we can worship God not only in Jerusalem or on the mountain, but everywhere where we are. This journey, both for the woman at the well and for Israel here in Rephidim, asks to trust God. Lent is a journey where we ask to trust God. He provides. He nourishes. He enables. He calls and leads. Trusting God is the journey through the wilderness. For Jesus, it was crossing those cultural boundaries that led his disciples through Samaria. It's also crossing those cultural and religious and societal boundaries that brought him to a place where he could interact with the Samaritan woman. Let's imagine ourselves at this well or in the wilderness. Are we the ones bringing up water for our neighbours? Seeking not to quench thirst first, but to find living water that sustains us all. And so I'll end just with this question. What are you thirsting for?